Stampy. You're welcome for the next hour. We have with us a treat. The complete song of Out of Reach by Legendary Housecast. Now, we have a real treat. Charlie Nash, tech journalist, is here. For those of you who don't know who Charlie is, you worked for a long time for Breitbart, covering Gamergate, tech issues, things like that. I interviewed you for my book.
Yes.
So all that stuff about Gamergate and so on and so forth came from you. And one of the things that I am excited about with this show is I get to introduce my audience to people that they might not be familiar with, but who I think are pretty awesome. But they canceled. But fortunately, you were in town.
Yeah.
So we have Charlie Nash here, all the way from the UK. Charlie, you just turned 21.
Yeah, I did. Is that
You get close to the mic.
Yeah, I just turned 21, came out to the States, see what New York was like. It sucks. The food's good, but everything about this city is borderline satanic. I mean, personally, every street I walk down, I see nothing but evil in this city.
You are one of my absolute favorite people. And it is so fun talking to you because you remind me a lot of what I was like when I was your age. So you have all these bizarre interests, and we're going to get into them in a minute. You know more than anyone else I know about Gaddafi, which is a road I have not gone down, but I feel I need to, given my background work with North Korea and Kim Jong-un. Why don't you tell me a bit about where the state of gaming is nowadays vis-a-vis politics? Because we talked about that at length in the book, Gamergate, and the evangelical left trying to kind of dominate that industry. How are things stand in 2019?
Well, 2019, things are different. I don't really... In 2015, for instance, 2014, 2015, there was this big war between the SJWs and the normal gamers who just wanted to get on with life. But I feel like that kind of war is long over. I don't really think SJWs are a thing anymore. I mean, personally, do you ever see any kind of crazy social justice people on the streets anymore, like you saw in protests in 2016? It just doesn't really happen these days. So I think by and large...
Wait, don't you think Andy Go has many videos and Antifa and things like this?
Yeah, you've got Antifa, but Antifa are different to the...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just the protesters, I'm
talking about the crazy ones.
Like 8 Skrillex.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like the what was the other one called? Trigglypath.
Yeah.
The kind of crazy people. They just kind of seem to have vanished. So I think that war is over. I think the normal, decent people won that war. I mean, there's still some problems with the gaming press, and Gamergate was about ethics in gaming journalism. A lot of people get that wrong. They say that Gamergate was about kind of politics. I mean, to a slight degree, but it was mainly about reclaiming an ethical games journalism industry, where people were sleeping with each other and not disclosing that, where people were writing up reviews about friends, where people were so on and so on. So that was what it was about, and I think those people have been exposed. I think that is kind of a one war. But yeah, I mean, as I said to your book, Gamergate was kind of a precursor to a lot of the cultural wars of today. I mean, it was one of the first instances of having a cultural war on the internet, where you had kind of normal, reasonable people who just wanted to do something and get on with their life, and then you had people who had to inject kind of crazy politics into every bone of that hobby. So it was, in a sense, a precursor to what we have today. But I think that war is long over.
So that's good. But I don't know. When we were talking about the book, you basically had said they had won.
Yeah.
No, they had won.
Oh, who? What? The social justice people?
Yeah, that they still basically run all games journalism.
Well, I mean, I spoke to you for your book. What was it, like almost 2 years ago?
Sure.
Now? So it was. I think now it's a lot better. Back then, it wasn't completely won, but I think now it is completely won. And yeah, you're right. Those people do still run a lot of institutions. I mean, some of the largest gaming press sites are run by those people, but people just aren't visiting them anymore. I mean,
that's interesting, because there's so many people on the right who want to make it out, or who believe that it's getting worse and worse, drowning in quicksand. And this is one example where it's like, when the victory happens, it's kind of like an anticlimax, because it goes back to we're just talking about video games. There's no kind of victory of good over evil.
Well, we got Gen Z kind of coming up. In 2014, Gen Z was we were only at the start of that. I think as more and more young people are coming into the world and are growing up and coming of age, I think they're doing a lot of wonders for the political landscape. I think they're people who have grown up kind of on Xbox Live chat rooms, saying edgy things, kind of messing about with their friends, trying to be as offensive as possible. And those are the people that are now growing up and coming into kind of adulthood. And so we have a new atmosphere, I think. We have a generation of people that were brought up being as edgy as possible, as stupid as possible, and not really thinking about what they say, which is now replacing this old generation of, I guess, like nannies.
Yeah, Miss Grundy, I think you guys call her overseas.
Huh?
Don't you call her Miss Grundy?
Miss Grundy?
Do you not know your own slang?
No.
Miss Grundy is shorthand. You know, like how people say the man when they refer to cops?
Mm-hmm.
Miss Grundy is shorthand for like people who are the nannies.
I didn't know that.
Are you really British?
Yeah.
Oh, sing a song then.
What song do you want?
Wait, so go ahead.
You're Drunken Sailor?
Tell me something that Americans don't realize about the United Kingdom.
Americans don't realize that the food in the United Kingdom is miles better than American food. So Americans pretend that our food is like this barbaric goblin stew.
Yeah.
Full of eyeballs and fingers.
And peas.
And like worms.
Lots of peas.
Yeah, they think that's what we eat. But we have some great food. You just have to find it. I mean, one of the problems is Americans think that Irish food, Irish breakfast, they think fucking Irish food is Irish food. It's actually British food. So I went to an Irish pub. Oh, this is a Irish classic. It's bangers and mash. It's sausages and mash. I'm like, well, that's a fucking English classic. That's not an Irish dish. That's an English dish. Maybe it's an Irish dish as well.
Isn't Irish food hunger?
It might have been a while ago, but certainly not today. I mean, they have a new Silicon Valley over there, don't they?
I don't know.
Yeah, they do. Because there's no tax.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've had people say, oh, have you ever tried an Irish breakfast? Irish breakfast is so good. It's like toast, beans, sausage, bacon, hash browns, tomatoes, mushrooms. I'm like, that's an English breakfast. Yeah, we have those. The same thing that you said looked disgusting when I said, like, this is an English breakfast you're now advocating for. Americans have this weird thing with Irish. Like, everyone thinks they're Irish, and they go to Irish pubs, and they love Irish food. I don't get it.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a county called Hertfordshire.
Okay.
Which is just outside of London. Very, very green, but close to London.
Is that known for its cows?
I mean, there's about a million fucking places in England that are known for cows, so I don't know if you could say that it's known for its cows, but there are cows there.
No, but isn't there a breed called like Hertfordshire cow?
I think that might be Hereford.
Oh.
there's Hertford and there's Hereford.
Okay.
But there might be Hertfordshire cow. I don't know.
Okay. So if you think New York has evil on every block, why are you here for your were you here for your 21st?
Well, I thought I'd come into the belly of the beast. I thought maybe it would inspire me to write about some stuff. It hasn't. It's just made me depressed slightly. But maybe I can write about it in the future when I look back and think how terrible the city is. But no, there's some great people here. You're here. There's some other great people here. Some people who aren't wholly corrupted by the satanic city. So I had to come and see you guys, and I had to come and bring my positive energy to a city of such decadence and sin.
Was it tough finding out that you were positive?
That I was positive. Yeah, very, very tough.
But you got the NHS there. So
You're such a retard.
Is that right? Why are you positive?
It's just like non-stop dad joke with you, mixed with like some stuff that no one's dad would ever say.
That's a good mix. I am old. I am your dad's age.
Yeah, I guess. How old are you?
I'm 42.
Yeah, you're about the same age as my dad.
Yeah, and we both cry ourselves to sleep.
I can call you dad now.
Daddy.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. It's you wouldn't be the first, and you certainly won't be the last.
Well, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what makes you say satanic though?
I mean, I am speaking in jest. I mean, I'm being a bit silly, but It is a satanic city, really. I mean, you look at the architecture. I don't know. Have you ever read Dreams in the Witch House by H.P. Lovecraft?
Of course.
And you know, it's all kind of like satanic geometry. Like
Non-Euclidean, yeah.
Yeah, like how everything's shaped is like satanic.
Sure.
And that is New York. Like everything is shaped to be satanic and to like suck the soul out of its inhabitants.
But I mean, I think there's a lot of like squares. You think a square is a satanic shape?
Well, no, it's not squares, is it? It's not a city of squares.
It's a grid.
Yeah, it's a grid, but the buildings, they're like, you look at them and you feel this kind of uneasy energy. Like you're looking into kind of like a portal to hell.
Can you give me an example? Do you mean like more like I think the Chrysler Building is the most beautiful thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
But there's also lots of these soulless kind of modernist skyscrapers, which are just squares. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm just referring to every building in New York City because, I mean, skyscrapers are inherently satanic.
How's that? Because they're giving the finger to God, basically being hubristic?
Well, there's a couple angles you come at it with. One of them, obviously, is that they represent finance, which is satanic in itself.
Okay.
There's nothing more satanic than finance.
Okay.
And the economy. And facts over feelings. That is pure Satan. But the other thing is...
Is Satanism a euphemism here?
I mean, I guess.
Okay.
Like, I'm not talking about Anton LaVey. I'm talking about where you look at something and you're like, that's evil. That if Satan's real, like he lives within
Ben Shapiro.
This glass. I'm not talking about Ben.
You just said facts over feelings.
Yeah, I'm talking about the buildings, and I'm not talking about Ben Shapiro. I'm not saying Ben Shapiro is satanic.
Okay,
though there is a case for that. But I'm talking about kind of this mindset that all that matters is money and finance. And
okay,
people don't matter.
Soullessness.
Yeah, soullessness.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and that's what kind of New York represents to me, and DC to an extent. But here it's kind of everyone who's in power in New York looks at the people of New York, like the working people of New York, as kind of numbers, right? They're kind of ants which are made to do these small menial tasks to benefit the people at the top. But they don't see these people as real people, and that's why you can't afford to buy any property in New York, because the people in power don't think that you deserve property in New York. I mean, that's as simple as it is. I mean, you can talk about economics and finance and all of that garbage, but when it comes down to it, we're a world of humans, and feelings and emotion are more important than facts, which are just kind of bullshit numbers that are used to keep the working man down.
When have you been pricing home purchases?
Well, I've been looking at what the average property costs in New York, just for kind of interest purposes. And I mean, wow. People who live in New York usually aren't poor, right? I mean, people come here for big, rich jobs.
There's lots of poor people.
Yeah, there are, but also it's like one of the richest cities when you look at its inhabitants. And even those poor fuckers can't afford to buy a house here. I mean, there aren't houses here. There's just soulless, satanic cubes and fucking skyscrapers. But even
are you including the boroughs? Because there's lots of houses in like Brooklyn and Queens.
Yeah, there's places in Brooklyn and Queens. But again, I was in Brooklyn yesterday, and some of the places there were the same prices in Manhattan.
Sure.
And it's evil. I mean, is there nothing more evil than keeping property from people?
Yes.
You think so?
Yeah, killing people is a lot more evil.
Well, killing is an easy way out. If you die, it's an easy way out. But if you're kept in kind of perpetual non-ownership, I mean, that's evil.
Well, I mean, I certainly would agree with the opposite of that property owning is good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why. I don't think most people who want to own their own property are going to gravitate toward New York. I agree that that's kind of, or San Francisco is even a better example, that that's something that's very counterintuitive. But I think lots of people own apartments and houses. It's just not going to be in New York City, Manhattan proper.
But what about the people who are born and raised here, who don't want to leave because their family's here? It's all they know.
I came here when I was 2. I wasn't born here technically, but I've been in Brooklyn all my life.
And those people often can't afford to buy property.
Right, but what I'm saying is if you're renting a house, an apartment, and you're raising your family there, I don't see how, and you're secure in your personhood and in your location, I don't see how that is necessarily wrong?
Well, because, I mean, I guess you define freedom as something different to how I define it. Freedom to me is making sure that as many people as possible own land. That is what I consider to be freedom. Like, the more people who own land, that's like maximum freedom.
Land or property? Do you mean literally land?
Well, land or property. I mean, property is on land.
No, what I'm saying is, does it count if like you have a building and like 10 people each own a floor?
I mean, to an extent, if we're going to live in an overpopulated world, we have to consider apartments. But I think in an ideal world, everyone would own like an actual piece of land with like a homestead on it. But I get it that we're an overpopulated world. People like to live in cities. So I would settle at this point in my kind of ideological quest for everyone to own like an apartment. I think everyone deserves to own where they live. They deserve to own the roof over their head. And if they don't, then that's not a free society. And I mean, you can call it freedom by being able to go whatever store you want, being able to parade around naked once a year, but that's not freedom, really. I mean, fucking as many people as you want isn't freedom if you're being forced to live in kind of serfdom. I mean, it's only freedom if you own the roof over your head, and no one owns the roof over their head.
Do you think having a mortgage is a contradiction of that element of freedom?
Well, mortgages are like just another element of that serfdom. It's just, I don't want to go into it because I could spend 3 hours talking about like my views on ownership.
But we have time.
All right, okay. All right, I'll go into it then. Mortgages kind of provide the illusion that you're owning your home, right? So you buy your house, but then you are kind of linked, you are locked in to that financing of the house.
Yeah.
So it's basically just like renting. And a lot of people don't even manage to pay off the mortgage before they die. Like there are a substantial amount of people who reach the age when they die and they haven't paid off their mortgage.
Sure.
And that is not ownership, that's not freedom. Sure, some people will pay it off at like, 40, 50 years old.
But they get equity and they can sell the house.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the other thing that I have a problem with. People looking at houses, looking at property and land, like it's an investment, which it is, but looking at it like it's a financial game. People look at it as if the whole purpose of buying a property is to just make money on it, to sell it and then make money and then engage in some more hedonism. But you should be buying a house, you should be buying a property to build links in whatever community you're in. You should be buying it because you want to settle down, you want to anchor down. I mean, most people's natural instincts are to anchor down somewhere. Few people want to just travel the world like a kind of roaming, like snake oil salesman. I mean, how many people want to do that? People tell themselves they do because they have no other option, but no one wants to. People want to anchor themselves down somewhere. People want property. And we have to start looking at property in an emotional way, in a kind of way where we look at it as something we need to do emotionally. Like our emotional health depends on finding a place, buying it, and settling down. But instead, people look at it as just this ridiculous financial game, which ultimately is purposeless, because what is the point of making money if you can't even just settle down and buy whatever house you want to live in? I mean, that's the point, right?
But I mean, if people get a house when they're 21, they're not going to be the same person that they are at 30 or 40. They're going to get married, have kids, or you just even their lifestyle might change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sure, but what's the point?
I'm asking you what I mean. If you're saying you have that piece of property when you're a certain age, and people want to be locked in and be part of the community, but that the person you are at one age is not going to be the same person you are later in life.
Yeah, sure. So you might want to move somewhere else. You might want to get a bigger place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you'd have to work out a new system to replace the current property system. But people, I'll get into this other point. People pretend that like capitalism is a flawed system, but it's the best system. Like, oh yeah, it's bad, but at least it's better than socialism. That's what people say. But it really isn't. I mean, it's an old system. It's a fairly old system. It's the 21st century, as we're always reminded by progressives. So why can't we come up with a better system? Why do we have to constantly look at like free systems? You're either for capitalism, socialism, or fascism. Why do we have to limit ourselves to those options? I mean, all three of them basically have failed. Why can't we look towards something that works for everyone, that's based on 21st century problems?
So what would you call your system?
I don't have a system. I'm just I'm just spitballing here.
Okay, but you're like emotionalism, emotional propertyism,
Maybe. I mean, distributism is a decent system.
like
but
Chesterton.
yeah, but it's not made for the 21st century. So I don't know if I could say that distributism is the answer, because I don't know if it could kind of work in the situation we're in. I think maybe a modified form of distributism with aspects of socialism maybe is the way forward. But I have this big problem with conservatives saying that capitalism is awesome, capitalism's so great. I mean, we see it all the time, right? You have like the turning point kind of people who talk about social conservatism and how we need to reclaim elements of social conservatism, and then say that capitalism is awesome, it's the best system. They don't see that capitalism is the thing that's destroying these conservative values. I mean, like the family, for instance. Something as simple as the family is being destroyed by capitalism. I mean, it's just reality. Another thing, national culture and identity destroyed by capitalism, because everywhere is becoming the same, because everywhere is capitalist. I mean, you go to somewhere in the far east of Asia and you expect it to be different, right? Oh, it's a different place, different people. They have the same roads, they have the same stop signs, they have the same stores, even largely, sometimes the same fast food places, and everywhere is the same. There's just no kind of diversity.
If everywhere was the same, why'd you come to New York?
There are mild differences in places, and I came to New York because it is the belly of the beast. It's the kind of center of this soulless system. And I wanted to see what it was like. And also I wanted to see some wonderful people who live in New York, because there are some wonderful people who live in New York.
Who would you say is with the center of like the soulful system?
Say that again?
Like what place would you go where you would find to be soulful?
Well, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because everywhere's become so just the same. I mean, where has capitalism not reached?
North Korea?
Yeah, I mean, I was about to bring that up, actually. North Korea, maybe that is a soulful place, but I don't want to say that North Korea is what I want, because North Korea has some major problems. As I said, communism and capitalism and fascism, they're all failed systems. They're all systems which keep people unhappy and depressed. And obviously that's a communist nation, and people there really are not happy. I mean, you can make the argument that some of the peasants there might be mildly happy because they don't know what they're missing.
Sure.
And I think that's a valid argument. But it's not a system that we should copy. It's not what we should be striving for. But it's an example of a place that hasn't been touched by capitalism. And so it has maintained, even though it's bad and even though it's this wacky system, it's maintained this weird, quirky national identity where if you go there, it is really not like anything in America, right? It's not like anything in Europe.
Correct.
So it has that going for it, but again, it's an unhappy place.
So again, if New York City is the belly of the beast, what would be the closest analog to the opposite of what you're talking about?
I really can't give an answer to that because everywhere has become so capitalist.
Okay.
I don't know if there is anywhere. Otherwise, I would probably have moved there. I think the answer is not to look for another country for inspiration. Although there are places in Europe which have kind of kept their identity.
Like Hungary?
I've never been to Hungary, so I wouldn't be able to say. But Poland, for instance, is a very Catholic country still. Things are shut on Sundays. So it has maintained something more than capitalism. So places like that are, I guess, an inspiration. But we don't really have anything to strive for at the moment. What we need to do is look at our current countries, look at the problems, and look at how to fix it. You have to look at why are people so depressed? Why are people so unhappy? And everyone is depressed and unhappy. I mean, you talk to people and they say they're happy, but how many people are actually happy? I think few, right? Few people are really happy. Everyone kind of wants that thing that's going to lead them over the line for happiness. That's why people move jobs, that's why people move house, why they buy things. So no one's happy. You have to look at why they're not happy. And I think the reason why is they don't own anything. People really don't own anything anymore.
So do you think homeowners as a rule are happy?
Yeah, I think homeowners who are mortgage-free, by and large, are happier, yeah, because they own something. And if you have a home, if you own a home, you don't have to worry about becoming homeless because you have a home.
But don't you think, like, let's take Hollywood. All those people own their own homes.
You're such a retard.
They are, as a rule, seem to be not only unhappy, but demented.
Yeah, but they're like the 1% of society. If you're at the 1% of a hedonist society, you're going to be depressed even if you own your own home. These are the people, by the way, who make sure that others cannot own their own homes. So I wouldn't look at them as the people to strive for. I mean, they're part of the problem. And that also goes to demonstrate that people are unhappy because they engage in short-term pleasure instead of long-term pleasure. I mean, we're sold the lie that short-term pleasure is what matters and is what will make you happy, and to just forget about long-term pleasure. Long-term pleasure, I'm talking about things like meaningful relationships, settling down in a community, finding some kind of higher spiritual meaning in life. Instead, we're told that casual sex, doing drugs, engaging in alcoholism is what's going to make us happy. I mean, even if people don't tell you that specifically, it's what is constantly sold to us through media, through advertisements, through just the social atmosphere. We're told that it's short-term pleasure which matters, and we're told that because that's what fuels the capitalist society. Again, this is why conservatives need to drop capitalism and find something better which works for everyone in the 21st century.
Okay, so tell me something that Americans don't realize about the United Kingdom.
English people can brave through a lot. English people are very sturdy people. A lot of English people could go through a lot, and they have gone through a lot, especially during the war. I mean, the war, I think, hit England worse than it did America.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean,
of course.
Some people might disagree. But, I mean, in England, I've heard stories from the older folks in the country, and they would walk out the door and, oh, look, our neighbor's house isn't there anymore. It's rubble. They would have to, like, steal potatoes from potato farms to survive, to feed children. And so English people are sturdy, and they've always been sturdy. But a big problem with that is that it creates this kind of complacency. Mm-hmm. English people don't like to revolt. They don't like to fight against oppression. Not like the French do anyway. Like with the French, it's, oh, the gas prices have gone up by 2%. Let's go and riot in the streets. That's what the French people are like. And other countries are like that too. English people, it's just like, I guess we'll learn to deal with it. Oh, there's ants in my bed. I guess I'll learn to deal with them. I guess they're my new kind of friends. So English people can go through a lot and can really kind of just brave things that other people can't, but it creates this complacency, which is ultimately no good. Really?
One of my favorite sponsors here is BlueChew.com. BLUE, like the color, chew, like chewinggum.com. If you go to BlueChew.com and use promo code Malice, you get your first order free and only $5 shipping. What is it? It's chewables with the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. And these chewables can work faster than pills. You could take them on a full stomach. You could take them on an empty stomach. Here's how it works. You don't got to visit a doctor. You don't got to have the awkward conversation. You don't have to wait in line in a pharmacy. You connect with a BlueChew.com affiliated physician, a real doctor. You get a prescription. The online consult is free. If you qualify, you get prescribed online quickly, and then it comes to your house in discreet packaging. If you go to BlueChew.com, BLUEChew.com, and use promo code Malice, it's just $5 shipping. How? That's like the price of a coffee, and you could have fun. You know what I'm talking about. Let's get back to the show.
I'm just some dumb young guy who, like everyone else, is not completely happy. I've looked at why that is. I've kind of tried to think about why myself and others aren't happy in this 21st century society. And I've come to the conclusion that it is, one, people engaging in short-term happiness instead of long-term, and two, lack of ownership. Also, you could add three, lack of meaning, because, again, a capitalist society only promotes kind of shallow consumer identities. Like, people aren't religious anymore, for instance. People don't have a community, by and large, apart from maybe, oh, I'm a gamer, I like Xbox, or whatever. I like dick, I like vagina. I mean, we can come to those kind of sexual identities because they're meaningless, right? I know you and I, we're not completely straight guys. I know you're not straight at all, and I'm not a completely straight guy. And I think when you kind of immerse yourself in those kind of identities based on your sexuality, you realize how meaningless they are and how meaningless this identity is. It's people just associating with identities that aren't helping them, identities that aren't promoting any happiness. And that is what the capitalist society wants. I mean, coming to New York, every fucking bank has a rainbow flag out the front. I mean, yeah, big banks love pride, is what we're being told. No, big banks love this kind of fairly meaningless identity because it means that people are going to pay money. It's all just this soulless system lacking any meaning. But I'm just rambling.
So what would you say is your favorite Smith song?
Moving on briefly. Favorite Smith song? I don't know. I really wouldn't be able to answer that because I love all of the Smiths songs. I'm going to say something controversial and say that I might prefer some of Morrissey's solo work over the Smiths.
I don't think that's that controversial.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, the Smiths are great. I love the Smiths, but some of Morrissey's solo stuff, which people knock, people mock his solo stuff, especially his more recent stuff. But some of it's really good, especially like just after the Smiths when Morrissey went solo, and he still had some of the guys from the Smiths, I think, as his like band. I think that was like the prime Morrissey.
What's the perspective on Morrissey in the UK right now?
Everyone hates Morrissey in the UK. I mean, and I don't necessarily agree with Morrissey 100%. I mean, he places a lot of emphasis on Islam being kind of the problem of society, and conservatives do this as well, which I think is just dumb because like Muslims aren't the reason why society sucks. It's just not true. But he has identified that there are major problems with this 21st century liberal kind of system. He's identified that people aren't happy, and he's identified that something needs to be done, and so he's speaking up about it. I mean, when you're Morrissey, you're really rich. You really have no reason to make people just despise you when you've secured such a great legacy and you've got all the money you could ask for. There's no reason to go and put yourself out there politically and make people hate you. But he has, because he's identified a problem and he's spoken up about these problems that he's identified. So Morrissey, even if I disagree with some of his points, he's an inspiration in a very, very cowardly 21st century society.
Speaking of people who are unpopular, most people in the West know who Gaddafi is. Mm-hmm. And they know that he's kind of a crazy person.
Yeah.
But they don't know much about him. Now, you've gone down the deep dive with Gaddafi. Mm-hmm. Tell me a bit about his life story.
Oh,
is that him on your tie?
Yeah, I've got Gaddafi on my bolo tie here.
Okay.
This was actually given out to attendees at a conference in Tripoli before they murdered him.
Okay. Where'd you get that? eBay?
A friend of mine worked for Gaddafi.
Oh, it's very cool.
Yeah, and he sent this over to me because he's an older guy now, and he probably doesn't give it as much shit about possessions. I that's something that happens when you get older, right? You start to kind of shed your possessions and embrace the coming spiritual awakening.
Or you get, 150 shaving soaps.
Yeah, that's another thing that old people do. They spend all their money on cruises and leave nothing for their family. I mean, yeah that's another problem. But yeah, so I got this from him. He was the source for one of my recent articles for Counter Punch called Gaddafi Existentialists, where I evaluate Gaddafi's alleged kind of inspirations in existentialism, particularly Colin Wilson, the British new existentialist.
Okay.
And I spoke to a few people, academics, professors, people who met Gaddafi, and they all said they were all basically in this similar position that Gaddafi was heavily inspired by Western philosophy, and in particular existentialism. Now, most people, because of the kind of news at the time when he was around, I guess they consider him to be this kind of dumb, barbaric Arab.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of message that we're told about Middle Eastern and African leaders, right? Oh, look at this dumb third world guy. That's what like Europeans and Americans are told all the time. But he was someone who, from what I've been told, from what I can see, was very interested in like interesting things in the West, philosophy namely. He was into existentialism. And if you read his book of short stories, a lot of those short stories have a very existentialist kind of backbone to them. And I was looking into this, and no one had written about this, and I was thinking it was a big shame if no one's written about something that I thought was obvious, and that's a piece of history. So I just did it myself, spoke to some people, and released it. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of interesting sides to Gaddafi, and I'm not going to come on the show and defend everything about Gaddafi. That's not what I want to do at all. But I have an interest in him, like you have an interest in North Korea, I guess. I mean, it's just kind of interesting.
Well, tell me some more about what makes him such an interesting figure.
Gaddafi, we can get back into politics. Gaddafi was one of the few leaders in kind of, I know it's not modern history, it's kind of fairly modern history compared to everything else, to have identified the housing problem. So he, in his Green Book, I think, or maybe elsewhere in some quotes.
What's the Green Book? Explain it to people.
The Green Book was like Gaddafi's Little Red Book. It was like his version of Mao's book, where he outlines his philosophy. He basically is split into 3 parts, and he outlines what he believes in, what needs to be done. So a big part of it is direct democracy. He said that Libya and Africa and the Middle East and everywhere in the world should be a direct democracy where people can directly vote for things, because he said that the current democracy is not democracy at all. It's a sham democracy. The next part of it he identified was that people should own the roofs over their own head, and that was a major part. And then another part, which people forget as well, is it was a kind of a feminist movement, which sounds ridiculous and people might laugh. But he was someone who wrote extensively about women in the Green Book and how they're being kind of kept down and how they should be able to excel and should be equal in society. And a lot of the Green Book is about bringing women up to an equal position to men. I mean, I'm at the moment working on a book of the stamps of Gaddafi's Libya. So it goes from, what was it? I think 1969, the end of 1969, all the way to 2011. And it looks at all the stamps that were issued to commemorate various events and to kind of tell the history of Libya. And he did a lot of stamps where women, they're not wearing a veil. They're kind of doing jobs that were previously not something they could have done. And in terms of kind of that area of the world, he was a progressive leader in that sense. So that's another element that people don't know about him. I mean, people don't really know anything about him in England and in America. I didn't until maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago when I started looking into it. He was just this kind of Disney villain that I'd learnt about when I was in school. But if you look into him, he's a very multi-dimensional character who had a lot of strange and quirky. If you like absurdism and the quirkiness of North Korea, you'll love everything to do with Gaddafi because it's the similar kind of stuff. He was just a very bizarre. I mean, how many leaders do you know who have written a book of short, absurd stories? Like, what if George Bush decided, like, oh, hey, I've just written a book of 3 absurdist short stories, talking about like a kind of depressed astronaut. If George Bush had done that, everyone would be like, what the fuck? Why have you done that? But Gaddafi was the kind of guy who would do these strange things just because he felt like doing it. And everyone would point and laugh. But I thought it made an interesting leader.
Do you know who Stacey Abrams is?
Is that like a neocon?
No, she was the Democratic candidate for governor of Georgia last year, and she lost, and she's still butthurt about it. And it turns out she had written 8 pornos.
Really?
Yeah. And it's actually part of her Twitter bio.
Like erotic novels?
Yeah.
Huh.
So,
crazy.
And Bernie Sanders, I think, wrote, what's her name? Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, wrote like lesbian pornos, or at least novels with lesbian elements. And Bernie Sanders, I think, written something like that.
Oh, don't get the idea in my head of Bernie Sanders writing porn. I don't want that in my head. As much as I like Bernie Sanders. But yeah, I wouldn't hold that against him. I think that makes him interesting, you know?
Of course.
I like interesting, weird, quirky, outsider candidates. I think every candidate should write erotica. It would make them more interesting.
Okay, so tell me something that Americans don't realize about the United Kingdom.
Well, a lot of Americans don't realize that England is actually closer to Australia than it is to the rest of Europe. So England is more of like an Australian colony than it is a European nation, which is again why people fought against the EU. because they thought, why are we in the EU? We're closer to Australia than we are Europe. So what's the point of being in the EU? And a lot of Americans don't understand that. They don't understand that England is not a European country; it's an Australian one.
What are some of the other big things that make Gaddafi stand out from the pack?
I mean, there's one that everyone knows. He was a bit of a rabid dog. I mean, he would get up at conferences and just talk shit about someone who he shouldn't really be talking shit about. I mean, someone who's a neighboring country, the leader of that country, and he would just go off on a rant about how bad they are and whatever. He was a very uncensored man. He didn't give a shit what people thought about him, though he also did, because he had plastic surgery, so he kind of did, he kind of didn't. And he said whatever he thought. I mean, a lot of people, when I was researching my article, a lot of people were telling me, this guy's stupid, this is a dumb guy. I read his book, it's illiterate. He's not someone who's interesting. He's not someone who's read any books. And I just didn't get that vibe at all. I mean, I got the complete opposite vibe from reading his stuff. I think he was a very interesting man, a very kind of oxymoron of a man. But a man who was interesting nonetheless.
What about the architecture in Libya? Is that less satanic?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you about the architecture in Libya because it was all blown up. And I was a little kid before it was blown up, and I haven't really looked into the architecture of Libya. I mean, I'm not someone who's a Libyan historian. I wouldn't be able to tell you about the architecture or the food. Just someone who's looked into the kind of political philosophy of Gaddafi.
Well, I'm sure he had certain ideas about... I mean, all these dictators are very known for their construction projects.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't like Saddam. He didn't do anything really cool. It wasn't like Kim Jong-un. He hasn't done anything that cool. He did this kind of statue of a big fist grabbing an American plane. So they called it the act of American aggression. There was like the first act of American aggression, and then there were ones after. And to commemorate one where the US and Europe bombed his home and killed his daughter, actually, he made this kind of big statue of a fist grabbing this American plane, like crushing it in his hand. And that was a cool kind of thing that he did. But it wasn't like Saddam with the big swords which were crossing, and it wasn't like Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il with the big obelisks and crap like that. He wasn't that kind of vanity dictator. His vanity went into literature. He wasn't like, all right, I need to make myself look like the most cool, vain dictator by building a big obelisk for myself. He was like, all right, I need to do that by writing a book of short stories, or by throwing a kind of philosophical conference in Tripoli where I invite Western academics. He really wanted to solidify himself in kind of the intelligentsia. That was where he wanted to push his vanity. It wasn't like the other dictators.
How cucked is Britain right now?
Well, Americans get it kind of wrong. I mean, Britain's a bit fucked. It's been fucked for a while, though. It's nothing new. It's just, have you ever been to Britain?
Uh-huh.
It's a depressing place,
Yeah.
largely. Yeah.
I did not like it.
There are some nice places, but it's a depressing island. I think the architecture, I mean, certainly around the 60s and the 70s, the post-war era, a lot of architecture was changed into this soulless architecture, which you'll be familiar with in New York. And then a bunch of other contributing factors have made a depressing island. I mean, I'm a patriotic Brit. I like Britain, but it's not in a good place, and it's not been in a good place for 60, 70 years.
Is it true that there is no future in England's dreaming?
No, there is a future in England. I don't like people who... Americans do this. They say, oh, Britain is like a Muslim colony now. There are no-go areas everywhere. Like, everyone has to eat halal meat, and you get your clit chopped off. Like, they try and make
Laura Loomer calls it Londonistan.
I mean, some people do, which is kind of funny, like, if you want to go down that funny route, but it's not that bad, really. I mean, there are worse places, but that's, yeah, it's not... Islamic migration to England is not what has killed it. It's not what's made England a depressing place. It's been a depressing place for a while now. I mean, are you into comic books at all?
I am a comic book character.
Yeah, you are in Harvey
Picar.
Yeah, Harvey Picar's one. Have you ever read 2000 AD comic books?
I've not.
You're such a retard.
Hey guys, I want to take a second and tell you about this app called Blinkist. If
you don't have time to read, this is a great app for you. Here's how it works. It takes the best key takeaways, the information from thousands of nonfiction books, and condenses them down to 16 minutes so you can read or listen to them. Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan. I guarantee you, in 15 minutes, you're going to get the point. A lot of people use it. Here's how you can take advantage of this. If you go to Blinkist.com/malice, you get a free 7-day trial. They've got recent books, like Michelle Obama's. You wanna read all of Becoming, or do you need the 15 minutes because you got a date with somebody? They've got the old school stuff, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week in 15 minutes. If you go to Blinkist.com, Blinkist.com/malice, you get a free 7-day trial. It's free. Hey guys, want to take a second and tell you about Wix, W-I-X. What is Wix? Wix.com lets you start building your own website for free. And we used it. If you go to letthatbeyourwelcome.com, there's a link at the bottom. Wix gives you 10% off any premium plan. And over 150 million people have built their website using Wix, including this show. It was really easy to do. I told my producers to do it, and they did it. But it's easy for them too. Why? Because Wix has a drag and drop website builder, so you can customize your site. You add text, you add images, you add videos. It's like PowerPoint. They've got over 500 templates to choose from, so it's not going to look like everything else like on Blogspot back in the day. I'm showing my age. If that's too much for you, dummies, you have Wix ADI, Artificial Design Intelligence. You answer a few simple questions, and they make a website for you. You better own your own URL, because people are going to be Googling you, and you want the first result to be your website. If you go to letthatbeyourwelcome.com, you click the link at the bottom, you get 10% off of any Wix premium plan. Let's get back to the show.
So
I know what they are, though.
Yeah. So if anyone doesn't know what they are, they're these British comic books started in like the late 70s, still going on today. Judge Dredd is a character in 2000 AD. And for a long time now, it's been kind of, if you want to see how Britain is kind of socially, if you want to get the sense of depression in England and capitalist oppression in England, and see how kind of working people feel about the country, read some 2000 AD comics, and you get a good sense of how Britain is, because it's sci-fi, it's set in the future, but it's political satire a lot of the time, and it's a British comic book, and so most of the political satire is about Britain and British politics. And our system and our politics haven't changed that much since the 1970s when it started. And so if you read those comic books, you can really get a sense of how depressing England is.
There's a new BBC 5-part series on Thatcher, which isn't as good as their previous 3-part series, but it's still quite good because most of the people are dead now.
Yeah.
How do Brits think of her, and especially compared to Theresa May?
I mean, if you're from the north in England, you'll hate Thatcher. If you're from the south, most people regard her kind of fairly highly. Everyone hates Theresa May, with an exception of a few people. So that's the difference there. You have these kind of capitalist conservatives who really idolize Thatcher. But she was a very flawed character. I don't think it's wise to make these demigod characters out of previous politicians. I mean, conservatives do it here with Ronald Reagan, right? They pretend that Ronald Reagan was like this perfect demigod of a politician. He never did anything wrong. Everything would be so much better if we had Reagan back. But that just wasn't the reality back then. It's still not the reality. And people associate the Reagan years with Thatcher as well. So it's the same people. Sure. The Reagan people are the Thatcher people. The Thatcher people are the Reagan people. I don't really like either. But England is split on that.
What do they think of Boris Johnson?
People think he's funny.
Genuinely funny?
Yeah, people think he's a funny guy.
Okay.
You know, some people think Trump's funny, but it's not like that really, because a lot of people hate Trump here. And a lot of people hate Boris in England as well. But he's a comedic character. So even people who don't like him think he's a bit funny. I think a lot of people would go to the pub and have a pint with Boris, even if they disagree with his politics, because he's a funny kind of character who I think most people would like to hang out with. But
So there's no American analog for him.
not really. No, I mean, I'm trying to think right now. No, there isn't. Maybe you could equate Boris with kind of before Trump was too serious and people didn't hate him, and they thought he was, oh, look at this funny guy running for president, and like he wasn't despised.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe you could equate those two characters. I think that's more similar.
Okay.
But still, it's not that similar. He's really one of his kind. He's a British iconoclast.
Yeah. And what about Jeremy Corbyn?
What about him? What do you want to know?
How is he regarded in the UK? Who's the head of the Labour Party and the head of the opposition?
He's not very well liked at the moment. He's liked by socialists, but I mean, I'm from the London area, and the London area is like the New York area or the DC area. It's not that of a socialist area. It's a pretty liberal area.
Right.
And so a lot of people from where I am aren't really fond of Jeremy Corbyn. I quite like Jeremy Corbyn because he stuck to his guns. He's one of these few politicians who have stuck to their guns for like decades, right?
Like Bernie.
Yeah, like Bernie. I mean, for decades, Jeremy Corbyn has advocated for the same thing, and he still advocates for the same thing. He's a guy who hasn't changed. He's a guy that doesn't take money and then change his opinions, and that's really one of a kind now. I mean, how many of those do we have in England and the US? I mean, even Bernie, I think, is not to the degree of Corbyn. I think even Bernie is more of a kind of establishment guy than Corbyn. I think Corbyn's a real political outsider. And so I like him in that kind of regard.
Do you expect to live the rest of your life in England?
I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll have to see.
Well, how was it making a living being so young as a journalist? I mean, you don't have any formal education, correct?
No. I left school at 16. I've been working since, basically. I mean, I did a year at we call it college. It's a different thing where I'm from to here. But yeah, I mean, I've been working since then. It's a tough game, right? It's a tough game whether you're 21, 31, 41, or 51. Journalism is a dying industry, and it's a tough industry. I think a lot of journalists were surprised that automation would actually affect the industry. I think everyone was like, all right, automation, that will affect lorry drivers and like factory workers. Who cares, right? It's not us. And then I think journalists have realized now that robots can write articles as good as journalists.
Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been like tests. A robot can write like a proper article, you know, not like an op-ed, but,
Sure.
but a news article. Maybe there's been a crash on like a motorway somewhere. It can write that article. And I mean, that's worrying for journalists. It's a dying industry.
Well, is it worrying for you?
To an extent, but I mean, I don't know if I'm even a journalist at this point. I mean, I haven't broken news in a few months now. I'm more of a wandering commentator. So I'm not worried, no. I mean, everything's going to be automated eventually. And then we'll just, I don't know, live in VR, go to the moon in VR, go to strip clubs in VR, have some tube going down our throat, like pushing yogurt down our throats or some shit. I mean, if that's where we're going, that's where we're going. I don't really care.
So you want us to be in the Matrix?
I mean, I don't want, that's not what I want at all. I want agrarian revolution. That is what I want. But we're probably not going to get agrarian revolution. And so if we have to live in the Matrix, anything's better than now. I mean, I've always been a guy who's advocated for either complete dystopia or like the complete opposite, a complete utopia. I hate this middle ground. I hate this middle ground where things are kind of shit, but you're not like starving. It's kind of, you're just in an uncomfortable position. I want either like 1984 or I want like a cool agrarian revolution where everyone owns land and everyone's working on farms. I want one or the other, but this in between, I just can't stand it. So if we have to have tubes down our throats to be fed while in VR, going to moon strip clubs in VR, and skateboarding in VR, doing whatever the fuck you do in VR, then that's what we got to do.
So it's kind of like not yet a girl, not a girl, but not yet a woman kind of thing. That in between place is terrible.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's a bit of a weird analogy.
No, but I think, when you're 21, you're not a kid, but you're not a grown-up.
Yeah, I guess. But I don't think they'll ever let us get to, and by they I mean like the powerful people in America.
The Ben Shapiros.
Well, Ben Shapiro isn't the 1%. He's
The
not,
2%.
not really. I'm talking about like the people who control society.
Yeah, the 2%.
The people who own like all the property in New York, the people who control everything. I don't think they'll ever let us have an actual dystopia, because if we have a real dystopia, then people will get pissed off and people will fight against it. They have to keep people in this weird in-between where people are like, oh, this is shit, but at least I'm not like a starving third worlder. At least it's not Venezuela. And that's where we'll be kept in just kind of this perpetual nightmare.
We're running out of time.
You're such a retard.
What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Nothing. No, I'm joking. It's been very lovely to have a conversation with you, Michael, because you're one of my favorites in New York, maybe my favorite. And people like you are the reason I still come to this terrible city, and I brave the terrible streets, because there are a lot of good people in New York. And the good people in New York deserve to own property in New York. So I hope any New Yorkers who are watching this get the opportunity at some point to own some property, because anything less is not freedom, and we all deserve freedom.
You are welcome.